another minute now, and we will go.
Let's start. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. At the start, I would like to introduce Manisha and Atul, who are here with us today to support with the live sign language translation of the discussion. For them to be able to interpret, we request all the participants to speak at a steady pace. Live captions are also switched on for the entire event, although they might not be 100% accurate. The platform has an expected delay of around 10 seconds, so some of the attendees, depending on the internet connection, may experience delay in receiving audio and video. With that, let's get started. On behalf of the National Institute of Urban Affairs, NIUA, and the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, I, Siddharth Godbole, Associate Urban Planning from ITDP India, extend a warm welcome to everyone, our esteemed panelists, presenters, and participants to the third and final webinar of the series. The webinar is focusing on the topic of enhancing safety in public transportation systems to foster inclusive cities. Over the last 2 decades, we at ITDP have been working to transform urban transport systems across the country with improvements in walking, cycling, and public transport infrastructure. With the primary objective of scaling up this transformation across the country, we launched the Urban Log Capacity Development Program to enable a dialogue on urban mobility. As we know, addressing access, safety, and participation of women, persons with disabilities, and other minorities in cities is increasingly becoming urgent and necessary with the ever-growing urbanization. Today, we are proud to host this webinar series in collaboration with the Building Accessible, Safe, and Inclusive Cities program of the NIUA. The basic program has been actively working to mainstream inclusion in the urban agenda. The third and the final webinar as a part of our collaborative Urban Log webinar series puts a focus on enhancing safety for urban transport systems in our cities. The second webinar was aimed at mainstreaming dialogue around inclusive mobility, while the first one was to commemorate International Day for Persons with Disabilities, highlighting the role of technology in inclusivity. This webinar is also being live streamed on YouTube channels. With that, a very warm welcome to all of you. I will now take a few minutes to set the context for today's webinar. On this occasion, today we will deep dive into the topic through an expert deliberation on enhancing safety in public transport systems to foster inclusive cities. Mobility is freedom. It is the ability to move safely and seamlessly around a city. And this independence brings a better quality of life, low levels of social exclusion, and hence the ability to participate equally. Feeling of safety is paramount to any kind of travel, be it a leisurely walk, cycle ride to the market, bus, or even a metro to work. By creating safe transport ecosystems, cities fundamentally provide and promote inclusivity by creating systems accessible and safe for all to use. In this context, we believe it is critical to share knowledge, learn from each other, and grow together to plan, design, and strategize better for all the marginalized groups. The webinar today aims to create homegrown best practices and innovations, as well as diagnose the underlying problems to address safety and security issues and accessibility issues in the urban mobility ecosystem. Now, let me take you through a brief overview of the agenda for today. Beginning with the welcome address by Mr. Ajay Suri, Senior Advisor and Head, Inclusive Cities Center, NIUA, the webinar is divided broadly into two parts. The first part will have presentations from the implemented innovations and best practices. And the second part will have a panel discussion and a brief Q&A sessions with the audience. We will conclude the webinar with a summarization and way forward. Through the webinar, we also aim to stress the need to prioritize the rights and well-being of marginalized groups, thereby making them active contributors to the growth of the country's economy. I'm sure all of us are looking forward to hearing more about the subject from the experts. But before we start, I would like to request all panelists to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable. And all the attendees, please feel free to drop in your comments in the chat box as we proceed with the webinar. We will take this up at the end. We would highly encourage you to share your suggestions or feedback after the webinar with us over an email as well as through our social media handles. I also request all the panelists to keep themselves on mute at all times to enable an uninterrupted setting for the speakers. I now invite Mr. Ajay Suri, Senior Advisor and Head, Inclusive Cities Center, NIUA, to give the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Siddharth. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of ITDP and NIUA, I join Siddharth to extend a warm welcome to everyone to this webinar today. It is such a pleasure to be a part of the deliberations on a very important concern, which is safety and security in public transportation. As everyone will agree, safety and security are an essential pillar needed to transform our cities into smart and livable cities, and an important determinant of the quality of life as well. This is particularly pertinent from the perspective of the marginalized demography and gender groups and persons with disabilities. The census 2011 had estimated urbanization in India at around 32%, which is definitely lower than most developed countries. For example, members of the BRICS grouping have urbanization level close to 80%, except for India. Despite the low urbanization level, speed and scale of incremental urban population is unprecedented. Population projections show India's urban population at 600 million by 2030 and around 900 million by 2030. This means, as India's G20 Sherpa mentioned the other day, that Indian cities will be adding US equivalent population over a couple of decades and a Chicago every 1 to 2 years. Intertemporal data and various studies indicate the strong correlation between urbanization level and national growth. The World Development Report 2008 attributes this to the 3D effect of cities, which is density, distance, and division. 1/3 of India's population living in urban areas contributes 2/3 of India's gross domestic product. In order to reap the full potential of urbanization and effectively contribute to becoming a $20 trillion economy during the Amrit Kaal, Indian cities need to provide efficient and state-of-the-art urban services that address citizens' needs with efficient governance, thus promoting ease of living in the cities itself. Population growth, urbanization, industrialization, and expansion of infrastructure, including mass transportation systems, are driving expectations for greater safety and security measures, particularly linked to critical national infrastructure projects. It is at this critical juncture that India taken over the G20 presidency this year. NIUA, as the Technical Secretariat for Urban 20, is devising strategies which are cross-cutting in nature and would enhance the quality of life and ease of living in the cities. Safety and security, in fact, are an important feature of good quality of life in cities. Local area plans can be and need to be fixed to enable more eyes on the streets. Also, CCTVs, vehicle tracking systems, GPS enabled transport modes, and IT enabled devices are all part of this equation. What is also needed is prompt, reliable, and foolproof safety and security assistance that actually be present to protect the individual from real or perceived risks and harm. The share of public transport is decreasing in India. According to the 2011 census, more than 50% of the workforce, excluding domestic agriculture workers, continue to work at or travel to their workplace by in the absence of adequate transport facilities. The share of public transport is just 18.1% of work trips, and workers are largely dependent on private transport. The situation needs to be reversed through a modal shift in favor of public transport, cycling, and simply to decarbonize cities and address the climate challenges. But how? That's the big question. Safety and security of the commuters using public transport has always been multidimensional, particularly for the marginalized population in our cities. Addressing access and safety issues of commuters, particularly women, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized groups in cities, is increasingly urgent and would go a long way encouraging the modal shift to public transport. At NIUA, we are already infusing this approach and thought process into our DNA. As the Sustainable Development Goals have strongly reiterated, safety and security in public transportation and inclusion need to be adopted as the guiding principle in every aspect of development and to make our cities sustainable, safe, and resilient for all. There have been many success stories of progressively improving the safety of marginalized groups in public transport, as well as the critique of treating safety and security as a separate issue instead of complete integration into the broader mainstream practice framework. Since the launch of the Safe City program by the Ministry of Home Affairs and various initiatives under the Smart Cities mission, safety has become a priority. Safety has become a priority for Indian cities. Development of mobile applications, improvement in roads and transportation system, design, development, and regular implementation of safety audits, capturing perception of safety, robust policing, and improvement in ancillary infrastructure have been safer cities. Well, today we have a diverse panel of domain experts working on ground for implementing and evaluating the notion of safety. I'm certain that today's webinar will capture sectoral experiences, good models, and templates that we can replicate in our cities for improving the quality of life for all, including the most vulnerable groups in our cities. As the public transport sector faces the challenge of retaining and increasing its modal share, I hope discussion today will also collate the improvements required in public transport performance through comprehensive planning, where safety and security are important aspects. Reducing the individual to simple socio-demographic variables involves a loss of information on the decision maker's preference and consequent choices. The so-called socioeconomic or demographic variables, which are commonly used to describe the decision maker, in discrete choice models are too narrow to represent the person. I want to understand from all of you on how it is important to acknowledge the citizen perception and challenges through a participatory approach and deliver basic and essential services like public transport more efficiently, contesting safety and security issues. Public transportation provides a mobility service to the user while also producing wide impact on the system. Consequently, it should be operated in such a way as to achieve an efficient and effective transportation system. To achieve this, there is the need to measure the quality of service as a way to evaluate its performance. Public transportation reflects how women's access to education, jobs, or simply their enjoyment of city life is hampered by the safety and security aspects. As India is committed to working together with national governments under the G20 presidency to move from intention to action and draft a roadmap for global change that will be driven together with cities to build a more sustainable and inclusive future. I look forward to the webinar deliberations, which cuts across all Urban 20 themes and aim to bring out strategies by closing the gap between policy and practice. The webinar is, as Siddharth mentioned, the webinar is planned as the third part of the Urban Log series, started in December, and further the discussion on building accessible, safe, and inclusive mobility systems. I congratulate NIUA's basic team and the ITDP team for putting together this informative webinar on an important like public transportation, where safety and security is a priority. The discussion shall support improvement of transport service and contribute efforts to make public transport system safe and accessible for all. Well, this is not the end, but a beginning in the right direction. I am certain that India is coming up global leader, the Vishwaguru, and we will keep innovating for safety and security in public transportation for a safe future for all. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, sir, for those insightful thoughts. Indeed, as you said, today's webinar is not only to create awareness, but also to celebrate our success so far. On this note, we will now proceed with the first part of our webinar, where we will have presentations highlighting the implemented innovations and best practices. I would now like to invite our first presenters, Ms. Akanksha Juneja, Chief Finance Officer, Sagar Smart City, and Mr. Rajendra Shukla, Team Leader from Sagar Smart City, to share more about the work under the Toya application.
Good afternoon all. I am Akanksha and I'm a bit unwell today. So unfortunately, I myself won't be able to deliver the presentation. And from our team, Mr. Rajendra Shukla, he's Team Leader PMC, working with Grant Thornton, will be presenting to you all. Hope you guys understand.
Well, as you said, safety and public transport is very important aspect. We also felt, in Sagar, safety of women should be given a priority. And then, we came up with a good solution. We developed an app, which triggers, it has an emergency SOS button, which can be pressed, so that, the notification will go to police department, ICCC, which is here in the collectorate office. And it also goes to emergency contact numbers of the person who is triggering, the SOS button, emergency button, so simultaneously. And it also has a feature, wherein the camera can front and back, both pictures can be captured and transmitted to the ICCC and police department as well. And it also—
Sorry to interrupt. Would you like us to share the screen? It's currently not visible or presentation from our side. Would you like us to present?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Can you
Please share the screen.
Share the screen.
Sir, actually, post disabled.
Post
permission.
Post permission is required. Please allow us to share the screen. It has been disabled. It is giving a comment, disabled share.
Yeah, just a second, ma'am. The backing team is looking at it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the name, the username which I have to give the permission to, because I'm not getting any notification as such.
Akanksha Juneja.
Akanksha Juneja. No, name would be different, no? Control room.
No, sir.
Yes, you should be able to share it now. If you could check it here.
Yeah, I've made it a post.
Yeah, now we are able to, I think so. There's a presentation. Yeah. I hope it is visible to all.
We are still seeing the Zoom link. If you can shift to the presentation link screen. We are seeing the Google Chrome window currently now.
Google Chrome window is being visible.
Stop, yeah.
Ma'am, alternatively, we have the copy of the presentation. We can share it from our side if you prefer.
I'm just trying it once in case it doesn't get shared. Now is it visible?
Yes, it's perfect. If you can make it full screen at your end.
Yeah, now I hope it is visible. Please continue, Mr. Shukla.
Yeah. So it's very simple application which can be downloaded on the mobile of women who are traveling, within the city or wherever they are. It is this app works, irrespective of location. It also enables, it has facility, wherein the location can be identified directly, from where, the SOS button or the emergency button has been pressed. Till now, we have a women population of about 135,000, out of which, more than 5,200 applications have been downloaded, and we have almost captured, 500 incidents. More than 500 incidents have been reported, and for 40 locations, it also has a facility, wherein public can give feedback that, this particular location is safe or not safe. If it is not safe, then, the app, discourages, women to go visit those places. Almost about 40 locations have been identified by the users, and we have installed CCTV cameras in those locations. All 40 locations we have installed, CCTV cameras. The feedback from the common people, whether it is women or, police department or, administration, they've got very good feedback about this. And it is, advantages of the system is, it is one in all system, all in one. GPS tracking is there. It records audio, which can be used for further investigations. It also records, if video is enabled, then, it records video also. And it has got a feature, wherein, if you shake the mobile, it will transmit, the signals to the police department.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but we are still on slide 2, it seems. Is it the one that you're presenting?
Yeah, there's advantages of the system I was presenting.
Actually, we are able to view a slide which has a title called The Problem Statement.
No, we
Seems stuck.
Change karo.
Yeah, we are now able to see innovative solution.
Innovative solution. Then innovative solution is the Nirbhaya Sagar app.
Yeah.
Which one? पहले slide पे जाओ. Yes. So, the user will have to download this application on their this thing, and with they can register it with their mobile number. And rest I have already informed. I have told you about the system, how it works. I have next बताओ. नहीं, awards के पहले वाला slide. Key impact outcome. हाँ, ये इसके पहले वाला. Key impact and outcome. अरे की इम्पैक्ट एप्लीकेबिलिटी के बाद है, जो ब्लैक स्लाइड है ना नीचे, ये. हाँ. So as I told you, out of a population of 130,000, 5,000, more than 5,000 applications have been downloaded, and 189 accused has been caught, on captured through this app. 40 locations, as I told you, were identified by people. Those were vulnerable, as far as safety is concerned. And, looking into this, we installed cameras at all the 40 locations, CCTV cameras, all these locations. Next slide. Scalability. It is very important, technical component of the architecture, which supports scalability to provide continuous growth to meet the growing demand of Sagar city, Sagarpolis. The system will support vertical scalability so that depending on changing requirements from time to time, the system may be scaled upwards. Main technological components requiring scalability are bandwidth, computing performance, IT infrastructure, software, application performance, and advancement in proposed systems. So we can say, presently it is developed for Sagar city area to ensure safety amongst the citizens. We are planning to extend it in the district, state level, or it can also be, used at national level. Next is sustainability. City is proud to bring Nirbhaya Sagar mobile app as part of Sagar Smart City initiative. Women of Sagar city can seek assistance instantly in emergency situations such as eve teasing, kidnapping, harassment, etc. To ensure its sustainability, we have promoted Nirbhaya Sagar app through social media, camping, and public awareness programs in women's college, schools, and other places. Advantages of this system is it is an all-in-one system. It also has GPS tracking feature which tracks the user's live location, and whenever the button is triggered, it also captures audio, records audio, which can be used for any kind of investigation, which is carried out by police, at a later stage. When the battery is running low, it automatically sends the location to the emergency contacts. And for differently abled persons, in case of any teasing or any incident, by shaking, this feature can be enabled. Other highlights are our primary goal of the project is to ensure every woman in our society to feel safe and secure. Nirbhaya Sagar mobile app can be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. It can enhance women growth and improve accessibility. IT intervention will build a safe environment in society for citizens and provide freedom to achieve the goal. Event tracking and response system. Nirbhaya can play a major role by providing women a safe environment in all situations. For example, physical threatening, harassing, robbery, stalking, or family violence. That's all. If you have any questions, please. हाँ, हटा दो।
Thank you so much, Saga Smart City team, for sharing the design and technology integration on the best practice. I'm glad to hear that the work is being recognized already. So whatever questions and recommendations that we might have, we'll take them at the end. But for the time being, I would like to invite our next speaker, Meghna Sahu, social activist and secretary, All Odisha Transgender Association. Over to you, Meghna.
वीडियो बंद कर दो।
वीडियो बंद कर दो।
Meghna, are you here? If you are, if you could just unmute and
Siddharth, Meghna is connected, but might be facing some network issue.
okay.
Give it a few more seconds. If not, we can probably start with the panel discussion. Meghna is part of the panel, so should be joining the panel a couple of.
Okay, maybe we can wait for half a minute or so. I think we can move to the panel discussion. Thank you to all the presenters for taking the time and effort to share your success with us today. We will now move to the second part, which is the panel discussion. I would like to invite Saili Mankikar, Head City Climate Alliance, NIUA, to welcome the panelists and moderate the session. Over to you, Saili.
Thank you, Siddharth. And what an amazing start we had to, today's webinar with the Nirbhaya app being discussed with us. I think it's a dream for most, women and, vulnerable sections to really have something like this handy. So I think that was a great insight. It was a great start to the webinar, and I think it contributes to the larger agenda of, I think, NIUA and also FITDP of leaving no one and no place behind. It's indeed India's journey to have an inclusive future, and NIUA on itself and through the basic team actually is contributing so much to this vision through different policy interventions, translating this into tangible actions, and also building capacities to mainstream inclusion and universal accessibility into urban development. Of course, we don't do this alone as NIUA. We have several partners, and many of them are really our cities, our different partners across sectors, and many of them are a part of today's discussion. Today's theme for the panel is very interesting, which is the theme of the webinar, which is enhancing safety in public transportation systems to foster inclusive cities. And to discuss this, we have a fantastic expert panel. Let me introduce you to them. We have someone we just heard, in fact, her team member who spoke, Ms. Akanksha Juneja. She is the Chief Financial Officer of Sagar Smart City. And we also have her teammate, Mr. Rajendra Shukla, team leader from Sagar Smart City. We have Meghna Sahu, who is a social activist and secretary for All Odisha Transgender Association. We have Ms. Nidhi Goyal, who is the executive director and founder Rising Flame. We have Ms. Mamta Kohli, senior advisor from the FCDO. We have Dr. Kalpana Vishwanath, who is the founder of Safety Pin. We have Ms. Sneha Vishaka, who is a senior resident fellow with the Center for Legal Policy. Thank you, panel, for being here. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we go ahead with the panel. There are some detailed briefs about all our panelists posted in the chat box. Feel free to look at them at your own time. Also, considering the immense and diverse experience this entire panel brings, I think this is going to be a very, very exciting discussion we are going to have. We have identified a set of questions through, internal discussions and discussions with our partners on what we would like to really investigate through today's panel. While we'll be directing the questions, I would request the audience to add any questions that they would like to be asked in the chat box, or you could comment through any discussion that is happening, and I would be happy to look at it and even mention that as we go along. So again, welcome everyone, and let me start today's discussion by really directing it to the person who did the first presentation, Ms. Akanksha Juneja Singh. And Ms. Singh, I would like to ask you that, you gave such a elaborate presentation on the Nirbhaya application, and you showed us, the kind of reach it has. But I think perception plays such a great role in all of this. So do you think that women in Sagar are feeling safer now? Over to you.
Yes, ma'am. The feedback that we have got, it encourages us, a lot.
If you all allow, and if ever this voice is soothing to your ears, I would like to say something.
Ma'am, if you're comfortable, please go ahead. No problem at all. It would be nice to hear.
Up in Sagar, and earlier there were areas where we were not allowed to go. My father didn't allow me to visit a few areas which would say which were darker areas. Actually, most of the areas we were not allowed. We were just expected to go to school and to coaching, and none of the place we were allowed to visit. This was the psychology, like when I was in school. But now it has, with few these innovations, I must say, the whole scenario has changed. The women and the girl is more confident to go out of their houses, and they feel secure. They have a sense of security. Now, when I walk out of my house, even if it is 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., I can see the girls who are going back to their home from the coachings. Otherwise, they used to move out of the cities for higher studies. But now they are studying in the city. They are working. Women is coming out of their house to work, and they feel perfectly safe. I stay back at my office till 9 p.m. Out from my house. And I feel I have a sense of security, absolute security. Maybe due to these few of these interventions only. Okay, I have someone who is just behind me to help me out. If unfortunately anything happens.
Yes, ma'am. Got your feedback on that. So do you want to say anything, add anything to that?
Well, today I've heard, from many people, and even the police department, people are afraid, who's got the Nirbhaya Sagar app. You never know, so any incident can be captured and can be reported anytime. And we have done so. 189 accused have been caught on from this application. So 189, I mean, it's a good number. So people are definitely afraid of doing any kind of chit-chat or whatever it is.
Thank you, both of you for presenting this. And I think a personal experience really, helps us understand this better. If, when ma'am said that, words like confidence, security, when those come into, anyone's lives who's living a life that is, probably a little more insecure, and then you feel more secure and safe, then definitely there seems to be a change. So, taking it from there, let us talk to someone who comes from a really vulnerable section. And let me then get to Ms. Meghna Sahu, who I previously introduced you to, but she's a social activist and secretary of the All Odisha Transgender Association. Meghna, I would like to ask you that, from being India's first transgender cab driver and a key driver of inclusive policies in Odisha government, what has been your perspective in terms of, working at community level? What has really worked and what has not really worked? Like, what do you think are the two things? And yes,
Yes,
yeah,
would like to, yeah.
yes.
Actually, ma'am,
And particularly in breaking the binary notion of safety, I would like to ask you on that.
yeah, ma'am. First of all, I just want to tell you two things. As a driver, I want to share one thing, and as a passenger also, I want to
Sure,
tell you one
sure.
thing. Actually, when we are talking about our transport system of India, I have a very bad experience when I was in Dihri Johnson. I was traveled once because of my surgery. Actually, that time when I have done my surgery, it was a very bad hospital. Actually, it's not a hospital. It's actually transgender people as going to as a illegal surgery to there. So I have gone there. So when I actually late night, it was at around 12 o'clock, रात का 12 और 1 बजा था शायद. तो मैं एक ट्रेन में जर्नी करना था मुझे. तो मैं वहां से जब आ रही थी रात को 12 बजे, तो मैंने एसी का टिकट लिया था और एसी बंद था. बिकॉज ऑफ माय जेंडर आइडेंटिटी, मैं जब उनको बोल रही हूँ, मतलब ऐसे गाड़ी छोड़ दे रहा है, रनिंग गाड़ी छोड़ भी दिया था और रनिंग था. ऑल द एसी इज बंद था, डोर बंद था. तो एक जगह पे खुला था और मैंने उसको मतलब बोल रहा हूँ कि थोड़ा हटो में चढ़ना है. वो मुझे बोल रहे हैं कि तुम लोग यहाँ अलाउ नहीं हो, इधर नहीं मांग सकते, जाओ आगे मांगोगे. So being a transgender, people think कि when I am traveling in a train, as a beggars, मैं एक ट्रैवल नहीं हो सकती हूँ, मैं गाड़ी में नहीं जा सकती हूँ अगर मेरे पास टिकट होगा या नहीं होगा. they don't ask. एंड लोगों का ऐसा माइंडसेट है कि ट्रेन में अगर कोई किन्नर चढ़ा है तो शायद वो मांगने के लिए चढ़ा होगा, ऐसा है. और एक उड़ीसा का एक्सपीरियंस भी वैसा था. राजधानी एक्सप्रेस में मेरा एक फ्रेंड है जो दिल्ली जा रही थी, उसने भी बाथरूम के पास खड़ा था और उसका फेस वॉश कर रही थी, मुंह धो रही थी. टीटी आके उसको बोल रहा है कि तुम लोग क्यों अंदर घुसे हो, तुम लोग यहाँ अंदर घुसने के लिए कौन बोला है. तो वो बोला क्यों नहीं घुसे, मेरा मर्जी में जहां घुसूं, मैं यहाँ पे मुंह धोने के लिए क्यों ना धो. तो उससे झगड़ा हुआ. उसके बाद में उसको पता चला कि वो टीटी को पता चला कि वो टिकट किया है. तो दिस इज व्हाट एग्जैक्टली. और बस में भी वही होता है हालत. लोग सोचते हैं कि हम लोग मांगने के लिए आए हैं. दिस इज व्हाट. और मेरा सर्जरी हुआ था उस दिन, और मैंने सर्जरी करके मैं ट्रेन में चढ़ने के लिए आई वाज इन कैथेटर आल्सो. मैं उसको ऐसे बैग फेंका और मैंने रनिंग में गाड़ी में चढ़ा. और चढ़ने के बाद आई वाज लाइक मेरा सीवियर ब्लीडिंग हो रहा है. मेरा कास्ट्रेशन सेक्स रिप्लेसमेंट सर्जरी हुआ था. मैंने एसी में जब चढ़ गया उसको धक्का देके, मेरा इतना ब्लीडिंग हुआ. और उसके बाद जाके मैंने जब व्हाइट बेड पे जो उसका जो चादर दे रहे थे उसको बैठा, तो it was like completely red because of bleeding and all. So this is what exactly, अगर हम लोग ट्रैवल कर रहे हैं तो this is the situation as a passenger. और as a driver, जब मैंने ओला में भी गाड़ी चला रही थी, तब भी मेरा वही हालत था कि मेरा वॉइस मेल जैसा सुनाई दे रहा था और मेरा फोटो फीमेल जैसा का था. अगर कोई बुकिंग कर रहा था तो उसको फीमेल का फोटो देख के वो कैंसिल कर दे रहा था, उसको कंफ्यूजन हो जाता था. दिस इज व्हाट अवेयरनेस नहीं है उनके पास कि हाँ एक ट्रांसजेंडर भी ड्राइवर हो सकती है, वो भी पिकअप करने के लिए आ सकती है, वो भी ले सकती है. सो और दूसरा पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट के बारे में अगर हम लोग बस के बारे में बोलेंगे या लोकल कोई भी गाड़ी के बारे में बोलेंगे, इट्स अ लैक ऑफ अवेयरनेस. ट्रांसपोर्ट डिपार्टमेंट में लॉट ऑफ अवेयरनेस इज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर ट्रांसजेंडर पीपल्स. लाइक उनके ट्रैवल्स का कैसे जा सकते हैं, उनको कैसे बैठ मतलब सीट का क्या अरेंजमेंट होना चाहिए. There has to be a proper guideline in all these things. Basically, what I feel that I say, and rest of a lot of things I will give in writing so that you can go ahead also again.
Thank you so much, Meghna. Just one more thing. One of the part of my question was also about inclusive policies in Orissa. That so anything that you have to say on that?
मैम इंक्लूसिव पॉलिसी अगर हम लोग बात करेंगे इन डिफरेंट फील्ड में, लेकिन अगर हम लोग ट्रांसपोर्ट के बारे में बोलेंगे, सो देयर वाज ओनली वन इंक्लूसिव पॉलिसी कि यहाँ पे एक प्राइड ऑटो करके यहाँ पे चल रहा है, जहाँ पे वो लोग ट्रांसजेंडर ड्राइवर्स भी लिए हैं। और यहाँ पे स्टेट गवर्नमेंट का एक जो सिटी बस चलता है, मो बस करके, उसमें भी एक कंडक्टर, ट्रांसजेंडर कंडक्टर को भी उन्होंने रिक्रूट किया था हम लोग को यहाँ पे एडवोकेसी के बाद। लेकिन अगर हम लोग पूरा एंटायर कंट्री के बारे में सोचेंगे, सो देयर वाज अ वेरी few and very rare states, those are like transport facilities में एम्प्लॉयमेंट के बारे में बोले या फिर ये करें, ट्रांसजेंडर इंक्लूजन का हुआ है। और ओडिशा में भी जो हुआ है, इट इज मतलब थोड़ा बहुत, जैसे कि भुवनेश्वर सिटीज हैं, वहां पे थोड़ा बहुत एडवोकेसी के बाद हुआ है। लेकिन अगर पॉलिसी लेवल में हम लोग देखेंगे कि जो होना चाहिए, आपका अगर बोलेंगे खुद का मेरा ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस के बारे में हम लोग बोल रहे थे, तो तभी भी वहां पे ट्रांसजेंडर पे लाइसेंस भी नहीं बन पाता था पहले। तो अभी हो गया है उड़ीसा में ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस, लेकिन उसमें भी दिक्कत है कि सब लोग नहीं कर पा रहे हैं ग्राउंड में। हर किसी को, जिसको पता नहीं है कि ट्रांसजेंडर लाइसेंस है बोल के कर सकता है बोल के वो कर रहे हैं, जिसको नहीं पता वो लोग नहीं कर रहे हैं। ऑफिसर्स लोगों को भी उसके बारे में कंप्लीटली पता नहीं है कि जेंडर की जगह ट्रांसजेंडर लिख सकते हैं बोल के। और बाकी बहुत सारा पॉलिसी, जैसे कि आपने बोला कि हम लोग रिजर्वेशन के बारे में बोलते हैं, ट्रेन के टिकट पे हम विमेन रिजर्वेशन देता है, और हम लोग का डिसेबिलिटी का रिजर्वेशन रहता है, बट हमारे ट्रांसजेंडर लोगों का भी ट्रेन जर्नी के लिए कोई रिजर्वेशन का फैसिलिटी इज ऑल्सो नॉट देयर। और जैसे कि नॉर्मली हम लोग जैसे फेयर होता है वही फेयर देके जाना पड़ता है। एंड जो महिलाओं के लिए बग्गी होती है स्पेशल, एक ये होती है, लेकिन वो भी नहीं है ट्रांसजेंडर लोग के लिए। टॉयलेट्स स्पेशली मेजर इशू इन ट्रांसपोर्ट डिपार्टमेंट, लाइक जो प्लेटफॉर्म्स होती हैं, जो ये होती है, मतलब बस स्टॉप्स वगैरह होती है, वहाँ पे वेटिंग हॉल्स पे हो या टॉयलेट का बारे में, हम लोग घर से टॉयलेट करके जाएंगे तो घर में आके ही टॉयलेट करेंगे। वी डोंट हैव, इट इज अ लिंकेज टू इन दैट ऑल्सो, कि हम लोग ट्रेन में जर्नी करें तो टॉयलेट जो होता है वेटिंग हॉल में, मेल फीमेल का टॉयलेट होता है, ट्रांसजेंडर टॉयलेट्स भी नहीं होती हैं। तो दैट इज ऑल्सो वेरी मतलब प्रॉब्लमेटिक होता है। वुमेन टॉयलेट में अगर मैं घुस जाती हूँ तो लोगों को ऐसे देखते हैं कि जैसे कि मैं कहीं दूसरे ग्रह से आ गई हूँ, मुझे मतलब ऐसे नजरे से देखते हैं। तो मैं उसके अंदर घुसने के लिए थोड़ा मतलब ये देखती हूँ कि ताकि उसके अंदर ज्यादा महिलाएं ना रहें तब भी अंदर घुसूं, या फिर कोई ना रहे तब भी घुसूं। इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट to access the transport systems and all in India for transgenders and trans men and trans women people.
Thank you, Meghna, for your interventions. In fact, it just goes to show that while there are some efforts and there are some small victories, they are very small, and we have a long way to go where we need to move on transgender rights and accountability and inclusivity in policies. So thank you for bringing that out, and we look forward to your written feedback, and we'd be happy to include it in going forward. I would like to now come to Ms. Nidhi Goyal from Rising Flame. Nidhi, I was reading, many of your interviews, and in fact, in one of your interview, you present very interesting contrasts, and I want to bring that out where you talk about, disability that from a disability perspective of wanting to participate by being able to access on one hand and being fearful on the other for personal safety. Can you just explain this? This is the contrast which not many can understand. So if you would like to put that forth.
Thank you so much. It's an honor being here, and it's so important in the whole deliberations around U20 within IUA, as a steering committee member of C20, also leading some of the or co-leading some of the gender equality and disability work there. Policy and understanding what policies look like, but also thinking about where it comes from in lived realities is extremely important. Honestly, I can't remember the interview that you're talking about, but just to, I understand what you're asking. I think if we draw parallels of what we call quote unquote vulnerable communities, right? So we're calling women vulnerable communities, we're calling persons with disabilities, trans persons, so gender marginalized persons as minorities. If we put together all the vulnerable communities, we look at a majority that is lacking access. Drawing some of the parallels of wanting to participate. living in society is almost a right for everyone, right? Accessing public spaces is a right for everyone. We don't ask questions. And so my previous speaker really brought out very important pieces that who is being asked the question? Who is this assumed right for, right? And so that's what persons with disabilities, and particularly women with disabilities, would also tell you, that the rights that the rest of the society has is not really with this kind of community. And why we say we don't have this right? Because what do we mean when we're talking about safety? We're talking about safety in public spaces and urban mobility, but are those urban spaces even being accessed? Or who's accessing those spaces? And that's really important. How many women occupy those spaces? How many persons with disabilities occupy those spaces? How many gender marginalized persons occupy those spaces? To give you a simple example, to walk on the footpath or not a footpath and reach somewhere for a kilometer is a right that everybody has. How does then someone who uses a crutch or a wheelchair, and I'm using the most simplistic examples of disability, right, which we have seen, most of us are exposed to, we see wheelchair symbols in places, we pay equal taxes, we may be equal citizens of the country, but that occupying that street becomes impossible because of inaccessibility. What does it mean for someone who's blind to be independent? So someone like me who lives with blindness, right, or with low vision, what does it mean to cross the street? It does not mean, like in the UK or in other countries, that we would have tactile symbols on the zebra crossing, that we would have red lights or signals that have, either sound or tactile feedback in terms of vibration for folks to know when it's safe to cross the street. It means that I need assistance of another human being, right? Which is not a problem. We are all social animals. But what this does to people with disabilities is not just builds anxiety to move around in cities. If you ask and do a survey of persons with disabilities, you'll find that there's tremendous level of anxiety while planning a trip, right? I believe that there are some reports, including a report by OMI on this as well, around the trip chain that persons with disabilities use. And so anxiety is one component, but where does this anxiety come from? From inaccessibility, from the vulnerability, and from safety issues. Now, what does inaccessibility do? Inaccessibility not just prevents a person from occupying the space, but if someone like me occupies the space, or people still go ahead and try to find their way around, it also leaves us more vulnerable to abuse. Again, to make it a very simple example, and I've given this example in several forums, but remains meaningful and relevant, is that I was training at a special school for young girls, and I was talking to adolescent girls saying, access to public spaces, safety concerns, street sexual harassment. And they refused to acknowledge that there was any harassment. And I thought this is a great bunch, because there is never in the country, when we sit in a forum of 30 women, that they would say none of us have been harassed. And so I broke it down for them on how does the trip chain work? How do they access the street corner, the chalk, if you may call it that? How do they cross the street? And they said, okay, somebody helps us or supports us. And I've asked if that somebody has never tried to touch them inappropriately. And they said, oh, that happens all the time. And that was categorized as a disability experience and not as a flaw in the system, right? So I think for us, what would be really important is to remove it from identity experiences. So women feel that these are experiences because they're women. Persons with disabilities blame it on their identity. Trans persons have this identity-based experiences. And so somewhere it's like, oh, you're this, and that's why you have this experience. And I think that burden needs to shift within cities that are safe, accessible, and inclusive to the system, the policies, the practices. And so it's really important for us to center access and accessibility. And I'm putting this in two parts, because when we say access to public spaces, access to cities, accessibility, safety, and disrupting or breaking down or shattering social stigmas, all of this would be a part of it. Now, while we say that, sorry, will you give me a signal at a minute left? If it's already that time, then I'll start.
No, please go ahead. I'll signal.
Thank
you.
Or maybe 2 minutes left. Something like that.
No.
I think it's very important for us to unpack some things, and I'm trying to bring linkages from our previous speakers, right? We're thinking about when we make these journeys or are on the street, and there are public toilets. How many of those are accessible for trans persons, but how many of those are accessible for persons with disabilities? There are women with disabilities who've reported to us at Rising Flame that they do not move out a lot because they don't know, and they might wear diapers, but they might get diaper rashes. And a prolonged use of diaper and no place to change may also have long-term health impacts. So we are looking at a very experience of versus also some men with disabilities who've said, yes, it is undignified, but then, if you don't make the toilet accessible, I'll stand outside your toilet and pee. So we also need to think that toilets and accessible toilets are a persons with disabilities issue, but a lot of gender issue as well around mobility and movement. Now, what do we do when we don't have these kind of facilities, right? We are talking about digital safety and ensuring that harassment does not happen. But when someone needs to be lifted into a public transport bus, very much equivalent to being assisted for the blind person, holding hands, giving access to private body and space. When someone needs to be lifted, how are we going to prevent that kind of abuse and harassment? As a result, there are a couple of things that happen. That there's overprotectionism from parents and society.
Sorry, Nidhi, you just have a minute to go. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's overprotectionism from society. There is lack of opportunities. So a little more force on distance education, but also prevention from participating equally in the workforce. And I think the impacts need to be seen around the safety, and recommendations need to be made around those, right? So for inclusive, sustainable, and resilient societies and community, as well as inclusive, sustainable, and resilient growth of an economy, it is extremely important that we have cities that are that people can, diverse groups can access, that are accessible as well as safe. It's really important for us to unpack, and there's not enough time. When I say accessibility, physical as well as digital, but also think about where the safety concerns are coming from a state of power, mindset, social stigma, and so on. But lastly, a question that I'm leaving with, which we need greater deliberations, is that we should not start using surveillance, safety as an excuse for surveillance. While we are building safety measures, it's extremely important for us to have women at the table, persons with disabilities at the table, and other marginalized groups like trans persons at the table to build these solutions together, so that we ensure that the solutions are inclusive and safe, and the choice what people at the margins would like. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, NIUA, for this space for great deliberations.
Thank you, Nidhi. I think you left us with so much food for thought, and to take things ahead, I think. And I'd be happy to share with you that one of of course, the basic team, they've been working so much on all of this, but it's never enough whatever you do. But we are formulating a gender forum within NIUA, and we're hoping that we are able to kind of cover everything that many people and all of you are kind of expressing here. So we hope we are able to address some of these issues, at least through these forums. So we'll be happy to have you on those forums, in fact, going ahead. So thank you again. And let me now come to Mamta Kohli, Senior Advisor, FCDO. In fact, if you want to reflect on anything that, Nidhi really put forth, but you have been an advocate on gender equity and inclusion. So, coming from FCDO, I wanted to ask you that how effective do you think is the role of government, academia, industry, this troika in strengthening the perception of safety and security? What has been your experience here?
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, NIUA. Really good to see BASIC doing this. It was, again, one of the things that we did together with NIUA, and good to see it being institutionalized. I think Meghna and Nidhi talked a lot about from their personal experiences, and just to reflect, like Nidhi, you said, I don't think any women here, especially I can reflect on growing up and even now sometimes, the fear perception is very, very strong. All of us have been touched, have been felt, have been abused and stuff like that. We've experienced it firsthand. A colleague of mine used to say that the cities are really designed for able-bodied male between 18 to 40. They don't really work for women, pregnant women, or people who are met with injuries, or older people, or people with disability. I mean, it leaves out a large, large section um, of, uh, of society. And why is it really important? Because other speakers have reflected on it. I think it really it is about dignity. It is about quality of life. But it's also about how your life choices that young girl and their family would make, whether it's safe for her to go to XYZ place to study, whether it'll be safe for her to travel to this place for work. So I think all these things are core part of how society thinks and works, and we don't reflect on it enough. I want to specifically talk a little bit about women workforce participation and how it's linked to mobility. And two recent studies that we did showed that mobility was the single most factor that affected women's ability to move out. They wanted something closer to their home, yes, but they also wanted something which was safer, which was quicker, which was available to them, right? At a reasonable cost. Now, very often when we talk about women's workforce participation, women's mobility, we get stuck about the social norms that social norms don't allow them to move out. Households have the perception. Some of it is true, but we've all experienced how norms are not static; they have moved in our lifetimes. So I think these are very clear policy asks. Inside the question you asked, whether government research evidence. So what happens is very often all this good research, all the good hackathons and technology solutions that we create, they don't really reach the policy, right? The solutions don't reach the market. The solutions are not scalable, accessible, or marketable. So I think that's where some of the gaps lie. I think there's also enough evidence and even insights now about how important the importance of the human-centered design is, to say, right? There was this fantastic book called Invisible Women that most of us may have referred to, which showed how products are designed without taking into consideration the size or the body type or the constitution of how women are, right? And similarly for disability, completely invisible. The products are not designed, whereas we know that whether it's speech or whether it's visual, these are all may have huge implications and ease the quality of life for a lot of us and not just for people with disabilities. So I think this labeling, the issue that Nidhi also talked about, but looking at it in silos, looking at it only for a specific category, I think sometimes can be problematic. And I hope BASIC is one platform that we tried to create where you can look at things together. You're looking at a city as a whole. You're looking at safety, accessibility as a core part of city planning, right? And technology obviously will play a big role. And Kalpana, I'm sure, will share with you how tech has helped build some of these. And you saw an example of the app. But I think tech enabled to, and the kind of data analytics we are able to generate, the kind of aggregator platforms that we are able to come up with, I think the solutions are right there. It's just the push that we need, and we need to test some of these solutions. So, for example, the web-based apps, cab services, they've made mobility, and there's enough evidence again that shows that has really made mobility for women much safer. Why can't we provide incentives, the government provide incentives to have at least 10% or 15% of cars be accessible as well? Many times we only look at physical disability, right, with wheelchair users, and that's a very good, strong starting point, but we're missing out on a lot of other people as well. And again, there are good experiments that places like Big Bazaar and all did on how you create quiet places, how do you create assistance, how do you create facilities that meet everybody's needs. And I think it's also very important that the more the city creates these structures and these spaces and ingrains this as part of its city planning, the more people come up, it becomes second nature, right? Then you don't start thinking about it and forget everything else. I mean, by law now you're supposed to do it. So where are the audits? Where are the ability to track on, let's just flood it with RTIs and say, okay, what has happened? So there's enough, I think the policy frameworks are there, the evidence is there, the good intent is there, but how do you actually make it work? That's where I think some of the gap lies. And it's really important to bring all of this together. And tech is an enabler at the end of it, right? We have to be able to identify the problem and we have to say, okay, this is a solution we need to. And tech will help us get there and faster, more efficient, help us with the reach. So yeah, I would say absolutely important. And we, a little bit removed from the lived experiences of people, can help facilitate this kind of conversation, can help generate new evidence, can help test new solutions, and advocate for these solutions to be taken to scale. Look at best practices out there. So I think, Sally, that's what I would say. Absolutely important to be able to listen to everyone, and absolutely important to look at who's left behind and why, and how do we bring them in. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mamta. In fact, one of the persons, one of the participants has actually asked for, if there are best practices that could be kind of brought out, which, on all these aspects that we are talking about. So I think that's one thing that we must, aim at. In fact, many cities also approach us and say that, we understand that this needs to be done, but tell us if there are, practices good practices that we can replicate. So then, I think through this webinar, we are putting out many good practices there, but maybe we can compile them and put them out as well. And or if there is already any place where this is available, maybe we can share the link, Veronica and the others. Maybe we could do that because we have questions. Also, a small request to the audience, if you have any questions, you can put it down in the chat box. I'm going to have 2 more questions to 2 other panelists. And then we can take some audience questions and go to the next round. So that's an open thing, and you can just put in your questions there. And I would like to come to, Dr. Kalpana Vishwanath, lead Safety Pin. In fact, she runs a very, very interesting app and also has come up with a recent framework called She Rises, Kalpana and her team. And, this recent framework, I mean, I have also seen it. Safety Pin has developed, it really puts focus on safety as one of the key principles of gender transformation. Kalpana, how do you think safety, particularly in transportation, can help to achieve this in cities, like through such frameworks? How can that happen? Kalpana, I don't think we can hear you. If you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you to ITDP and to NIUA for having this webinar. I think very important, and for inviting me to be here. Really hearing the experiences of the previous speakers is very moving, and I think it's something we need to all recognize the kinds of exclusions and vulnerabilities that are there in our cities are really unacceptable. Time that, the time for talking and asking nicely is done. I think we have to sort of push for some of these changes. I myself have been working in this now for 25 years, and I want to see a lot more change before I go into the sunset, frankly. So I think I'd like to begin with that. And I think therefore for me, it's really significant when, an ITDP and NIUA center stage these issues, because really 25 years ago, it was a very small set of people. Can you hear me?
We lost you for a bit.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's very significant that a lot more institutions are talking about it. So I think there has been a movement in mainstreaming this concern. I think within institutions, within governments, it's nice to see Sagar cities, innovation, but so many cities do have interesting innovations which need to be supported, which need to be expanded, etc. So SafetyPin, as you mentioned, we are a social organization, and we have used a technology as an enabler to bring about social change. And our technologies and technology platforms are used to collect data that is both useful to individuals, but also useful to people who are decision makers. So our data is used to build evidence about what kind of change is needed to bring about safer cities. I think it's been 10 years since SafetyPin was started, and the She Rises framework. She Rises actually stands for responsive, inclusive, safe, and equitable spaces and services in cities. So we have recognized that we need to expand what we are, to us, what would be gender responsive, gender transformative cities. I think we need to have a wide range of changes. And as all the previous speakers have said, we need to have a lot of voices around the table. Mamta very rightly put that a lot of our cities, but products, everything is designed for an able-bodied male of a certain height, a certain build, sometimes certain ethnicities, so it is a very exclusive experience. When we talk about cities, why are we saying this broad range of things? Because while safety is important, we do need inclusive infrastructure. We need responsive services, because we recognize that services are very important. When we talk about mobility, mobility is a service. It is an infrastructure, but it is also a service that we need to look at. And equitable. And equitable is a principle which goes beyond equality. It is a principle which recognizes that unless we are able to see that there is not just injustice, but there is diverse experiences that we need to center stage when we build our cities. I just want to bring one more point that we have really recognized over the years is that we need to center stage as much as the issue of exclusion, sexual harassment that everybody's has talked to, but also, the experience of being, say, pushed off a train. I think for people of gender minorities, there is an added dimension of discrimination that they face certainly in Indian cities. But as women, I think one of the things we've recognized that we need to center stage is the work of care. And I think COVID really unraveled that for us, that unless we center stage the work of care, we are not going to actually have equitable cities. And in that, I think it's important to recognize that care work is primarily done by women. In India, Indian women and girls put in what they're saying, studies have said, 3.26 billion hours of unpaid care work every day in the country. So every year. So as we begin to recognize that, and we must mention that the burden of care work of all other groups, whether it's children, whether it's elderly, does fall upon women, which is why we have notions of trip chaining, we have notions of different this thing. We also know that our census, though slightly old data, but that is the only data we have currently, shows that more women than men walk and use public transport. So there is evidence and data today which is showing that they use public transport, they use the streets, they carry the burden of care work, they carry the burden of sexual harassment, and all this leads to a certain perception in the sense that as women, we feel we have the right to the city. I don't think as women in Indian cities, we feel we have equal rights to the city. There's so many levels that we're discriminated against. And certainly the added intersections of discrimination that we see, whether it's disability, whether it's gender minorities and other things adds to that. Age, I think age is an issue. We have a growing aging population and we need infrastructure, we need services to respond to that. Now, when you talked about mobility, when we talk about gender transformative mobility and transport, and I think Mamta brought a very important point. I'm glad that you talked about that study, Mamta, because when we often say that mobility and safety are reasons, safety is one of the reasons, and lack of good mobility is impacting the workforce participation. Often the counter is where is the data, and it comes back to social norms. I think we need more studies. There are some studies, but certainly I think a lot more studies are needed to show this. So there are 4 broad areas that we have identified that need to be addressed. One is the entire system of public transport needs to be very extensive. And here we're talking about the bus system. I think it's very clear that women and people who are low resource poor are still using the bus system, not the metro. They may use the metro, some of them, but it is the bus system. But most cities are investing in metro systems. And I think this is something that ITDP and others have been flagging for quite a while. And we need to put these things center stage, because where does the money go? Who decides where the money goes is something we need to interrogate as civil society, as people who have a stake in the city. Somebody right up front said, we're all taxpayers. I mean, I don't think that's the only point. We're all citizens of this country. And I think we have a right to have that voice. The second thing is first and last mile connectivity. One is the public transport system, but what do you do when you get off? And in that, there is the paratransit, there's non-motorized transport, but there's also the infrastructure there. For example, our safety audit, Safety Pin, has an app called My Safety Pin. All of you can download it. It's a free app available on Google Play and the Apple Store. We look at what makes a place feel safe for women, and feeling is very important. You can tell me till you're blue in the face that no case has happened here. But if I feel that place is dark and unsafe, I am going to be hesitant to go there. So the perception of safety does drive behavior. And so when we want safe places, they want to be well lit. There must be good walkable pavements. And that is a serious, serious gap in our countries, let alone disability access, even for someone who is at some, doesn't have a disability at this point. I fully agree that disability is a continuum. At any point, we can be disabled, we can be more able, and I think we need to recognize that as it's not 2 very different states of being for humans. The third is safety, and I think safety is very important. Safety inside public transport, safety while waiting, because studies have shown that women face sexual harassment while waiting, while boarding, and inside. So therefore, we need to address all 3 elements of the journey. And finally, we need more women to be visible in the transport sector. So she made a very important point about having women as drivers, as auto drivers. There are many cities in India today, I know, who are making provisions for this. And I think these are changes right up front. I think, Saili, you mentioned that we must recognize that changes happen. I think there's a long way to go, but let's also recognize that changes happen. And there is, but we need a lot more women. And again, our safety audits show, that's the final point, is that the more women that are visible in public spaces, it is actually safer for everyone. In fact, even men who use our app say that they feel safer when there's a larger presence of women and children and families. So because when you have women and children, obviously that place is slightly safer, therefore they use it. So even men feel it's safer, So I think therefore when you design for those who have been excluded, and I think vulnerability is one thing, but I would like to move to the language of exclusion, because that is more a language of rights rather than a language of protection. When we talk about vulnerabilities, the solution seems to be protection. But when we talk about exclusions, the solution is rights. We may be excluded in different ways. The vulnerability, really, as women, what is our vulnerability? It is patriarchy. Patriarchy is not a vulnerability. Patriarchy is a long up to down ideology which puts us at the margins. So I think also, I'm not saying there aren't people who are vulnerable. There are, but I think we need to recognize that we have to speak in terms of rights and not in terms of protection anymore. And technology, I will say, is a useful enabler, and public space is both the digital public space as well as the physical public space. And I think we need to recognize that. I'm just going to end with that. I think there are many more things that can be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. And I think, where I really started thinking is, when you're talking of the language of rights, and the first thing that, in the beginning, which you put down is about an equal right to the city. And what is that really? I think that can, we can have another discussion on that actually, but I think it's very important for us to think, what is it to actually have a right, and to the city, because I don't think women are oriented and we don't think like that, or any other group actually, we don't think, but we need to change that and understand what our right is as an equal citizen. So, and it's Wednesday when we smash our patriarchy, it's the day we do it. And so I think it's the right day when we are actually discussing this, right? It's a world movement of smashing the patriarchy on Wednesday. So I think I'll take you on that. So I'd come to, our last panelist, and that is Ms. Neha Vishakha, who's a research fellow at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. And Sneha, I think it's a great time to get you in, because your report on making a feminist city, right? That's what you're working on. And what has this report really shown you? How do you think building cities through the feminist lens can really help to create cities that are safe, that are secure, and for all? In fact, how do you think that women can think about equal rights to the city? And this includes, when I say women, I'm also including all vulnerable, all marginalized communities. So what do you have to say about that?
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's been such a pleasure to share the stage with such wonderful panelists, some of whose work I've long admired. And I actually have to say, Dr. Vishwanathan, Dr. Kalpana has said a lot of what I would have liked to say itself. I feel like one thing that I would like to sort of start by talking about is that there is a common thread, I think, in almost every panelist's explanations and points today. And to me, the common thread is that we live in an unequal society. We live in a society that is rife with hierarchy and domination. And I think that when we go to the roots of the problem, to me, the question is not just about inclusive transportation. The question is about who is the city actually made for? And I wanted to sort of also point out that the problem of unsafe cities or unsafe transport is not a problem that is restricted to India. It's a global problem. And in fact, recently there was, I think, a TikTok video. Somebody asked, what is it that women would like to do, if men vanish from the earth? The majority said they would like to take a walk at night. And I really find that interesting, because being able to take a walk at night in the city is such a small sentence, but in that sentence, there is so much that is locked up. And it also reminds me, I don't just want to talk about what I think the research in the report gave me is, I don't just want to talk about the problems, but I also want to talk about the solutions, right? Paromita Vora is a feminist filmmaker and writer based in Bombay. And there is a sentence that I think she said somewhere that, the health of a polity can be seen when there are lovers in gardens. And I think that's beautiful, because when there are lovers in gardens, that things are right, in a particular place. So to me, the question is about what do we imagine? What is the landscape of rights itself as a language? And I feel like that's where I would like to start. Who's the city made for? And my research sort of showed me, I think Dr. Kalpana covered a lot of the technical aspects, right? In terms of, and I love that she brought in care, because I wanted to go into even just unpacking the word safety, because this is not a new problem. I think in the second wave feminist movement from the 1960s to 80s, women had been talking about the right to space across the world in various ways. So we are having a very old conversation again and again. But each time what comes up is the question of who gets to claim space, who gets to be human in the full extent of what it means, right? And to me, when I think about safety, I want to think about safety not just as a psychological aspect, but an interpersonal one, a socio-political concern. And when something has so many dimensions, it requires us to think in a very nuanced manner that security is distinct from safety, where you can have technological solutions that can sort of create you can create security. So you can create systems where somebody might maybe come to help if you call. But in an instance, say for instance, if a husband is abusing his wife in a public transport in India today, would the wife call the police or press the emergency button? You would need the people around to intervene, right? So it requires a sense of community. And to me, when I'm thinking about safety, safety always comes from community. It comes from feeling cared for. And I think the problem with infrastructure, but this is not just a problem with infrastructure, but it is the larger problem of social organization, is who has been kept in mind when the social organization has been made and who has not been kept in mind. And to me, I find studying women particularly interesting because even though they're often classed as a vulnerable group, they're not a minority group. They're 50% of the population. So how is it that historically such a large group of people have been excluded and we continue to act like the system is not fundamentally broken? So to me, it starts from there. And so I think my main takeaways from this research is that sometimes there is a misunderstanding of the problem, and this process requires a lot of unlearning of deep assumptions we make. And in the report, I engaged with a lot of feminist geographers and feminist researchers of safety, including Dr. Shilpa Phadke, who is one of the authors of a wonderful book, Why Loiter, written by Samira Khan and Shilpa Ranade. So in that, and also in her other writing, she talks about the right to engage risk. Nobody can guarantee safety. It is impossible. You can step out of your house and you can meet with an accident. You can slip and fall. It's impossible to guarantee safety. But what is possible is to give everybody an equal chance to engage risk. In fact, her research shows that more men experience incidents of violence in public spaces than women. But women feel extremely unsafe. In fact, according to UN data and UN reports, the home is the likeliest place a woman will be murdered. But nobody thinks of the home as an inherently unfair space or an unsafe place. So there are a lot of, it's a very complicated issue. But what I'm trying to say is that this perception of unsafety prevents women from ever stepping out in a way that they can actually experience what a gift it is to be able to move. And like a lot of people talked about it, mobility is the lifeblood of a city. In fact, just like the circulation system in the body is essential for the body to function, a city will only function if the transportation systems are functional and accessible to everybody. Now, if there is a wide section of population, and like everybody pointed out, and I wanted to reiterate it, that if there is a pyramidal structure of inequality where you have the elite and the social elites, and then, so as you go down the pyramid, the largest group of people are actually the most marginalized. And I feel like women come one step lower. So when you actually make a city that is accessible to the most excluded groups of people across every cross section, then you are actually making a city that's even accessible to the very top. And here is where I also wanted to talk a little bit about the constitutional framework. I think we have such a beautiful constitution. And I think that the values of equality, liberty, fraternity, a socialist, secular republic that the preamble promises is only a promise when it's only going to be realized if every government agency, every transport agency commits to realizing those values in their day-to-day affairs. Because without infrastructure, a right will remain a right. And the problem in India is we have such wonderful laws, but they lack implementation. But implementation rests on the lowest levels of governance structures. It rests, most people, and some of my favorite, I think, civic activists talk about it. Everybody knows the prime minister, but how many people know their ward committee representatives, their councillors in their local neighborhoods? We need local governance to be robust. And we need to start strengthening participatory democracy at the most granular level. And I think this is a hugely important aspect. But before all this, we are at a stage where while technological solutions are important, I just wanted to complicate that. How many women own smartphones? There is a huge digital gender gap in this country. And how many women actually are able to access the internet? So our solutions to safety cannot be purely technological, even if they are one part of the solution. And I feel like there needs to be a holistic understanding. And I think there needs to be a feminist understanding, because I think feminists have been talking about this for 50, 60 years. And I think they're talking about it precisely because they've been excluded. We are always obsessing over the things that we can't get. So I think it's very important to sort of pay attention to what has already been written and to actually teach transport planners, architects, urban planners, social sciences, right? Like a socio-legal perspectives to this justice. So the fact that I've looked at the Council of Architecture's sort of the recommended syllabus, there's no course on feminist urbanism, there's no course on gender and planning, gender in cities, gender in transport. And I think that it starts at, it needs to be a holistic effort. And I just wanted to add that I don't think that it's all gloom and doom. I think one of the best things that Delhi actually did was to make public transport free for women, right? But they only made it buses, but I think that all public transport should be free. And this is something that is not only feminist, it's beneficial to women, it's more sustainable because it encourages use of public transport. It's actually great for your mental health, because often the problem with like a mental health crisis...
wrap up in a minute, please. Huh?
Sure. Yeah, I will just wrap this up. I just wanted to add it because somebody talked about COVID, right, earlier. A huge problem is this isolation. Public transport allows us to meet people. It creates naturally in the city areas where you are interacting with people. That is also true for walking and non-motorized transport forms of cycling, etc. So I guess my last thoughts to this would be like, I think reiterating everything all the panelists have talked about, but to also sort of unlearning a lot of our own notions of love and care, because love or care cannot come from a protectionist, fearful standpoint. It has to come from building autonomy and freedom. So the question would basically be that you want your children, your daughters to feel free and safe to go out. And that requires community building and that requires social change, along with legal implementation and technical interventions. So, and I feel like these are the kinds of conversations which would be having a lot more and in much, much larger groups. And yeah, so I think with that, I will rest my comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sneha. In fact, I would like to kind of come to some of the topics that have come up on the chat. So I'll start with some interesting comment from Dr. Shalini Mishra, actually, who works with us. She's a gender specialist. And she says that, and someone, I don't know, maybe I'd ask Nidhi to really comment on this. And she says, technology, safety apps, safety design elements, language of rights, inclusive policy, more women employed in the transport sector. Yes, but we must also engage with men to address security challenges. Nidhi, do you want to kind of come in on that and say something?
Sure. I think, sorry, just starting my video. I think,
but just very, very quick comments, because
yes, I think engaging men, I mean, a simple thing is yes. When we talk about people with disabilities, I think we're talking about the non-disabled people to change. When we're talking about women, we are also talking about, we don't live in silos. So I think the ecosystem shifting together, and that's why we've been talking about, all our speakers have been threading this together. Patriarchy cannot be changed by women alone, right? Ableism cannot be changed by people alone. Systems cannot be changed by a group alone. So I think having us at the table as decision makers is important, but not again in silos. So not in isolation. And just to say that that's why universal access emphasizes repeatedly that when you think of solutions for people with disabilities, you're thinking about the whole universe, not just a group. That's what a fellow colleague also, a fellow speaker also just mentioned about thinking about women, but then men feel safe as well. So short answer, yes.
Thank you. Thank you on that. Dr. Vishwanath, I wanted to just, ask whether you would like to comment on one of the points that, Sneha actually raised about, while technology is an enabler, it might not be accessible to all. How do you look at this as someone who's really working with technology so closely?
That's the truth. We have a very big gender digital divide in our country. So there's no doubt about that, which is why our use of technology, we've really tried to have different ways that, so for example, a safety audit, we do a lot of work in partnership with NGOs and CBOs where girls can go out in groups and do safety audits. So it's not an individual exercise where each and every person needs their own smartphone. So absolutely, there is a very big digital divide. There's also the access to phones, access to internet, allowed to use it or not. All that is there, and that is patriarchy, and so therefore that has to be addressed. At the same time, we need to I think address, like, how do you create those enabling environments? Like, I'll just give you the example. We talk about, say, some systems where we come back to mindset. So say the policing. Everyone says, oh, but unless you change the mindset, how will it change? But we can't wait for mindsets to change. There are many things we can do while we do that as well. So you can have SOPs on how to respond when a woman comes to the police station with this thing. What do you do when there's a case of sexual harassment in a bus? So I think, we need to attack the problem from all sides. And technology is one of them. In today's day and age, we cannot ignore technology either. Technology is also a form of violence sometimes against women and others, which also we need to address. So the world is complex and we have to work with that.
Yes, I was going to bring you in, Ms. Mamta Kohli. You can come in, and you raised a very important point about gender disaggregated data. In fact, that keeps coming in a lot when we are working in policy on evidence-based research and getting the right data to do that. So your comment on that.
Yeah, we can't agree more that you need to see, we can state the problem, we all recognize it, but until unless the onus is also on us to provide the evidence and to provide the how to, right? How can you make those shifts? How can things be done? So like, Kalpana was saying, social norms, all this, we can't get bogged down by the big stuff and not start looking at taking steps or doing things which we know can scale up or which are future proof. So I think it's really important to start looking at it. And this was a very small, quick study that was done with the Mumbai Metro that showed, okay, what was the frequency, when were women traveling more, who were they traveling then, how much were they spending, what was their priorities, what did they want to focus on. So, once you have that sense, then you're able to respond better, right? We had an incident where a young, person, wheelchair user, could not reach our venue because the metro escalators were not working. So she could not come down she couldn't come to the street. So there are a lot of these several little things where we don't realize where the system breaks down. So to be able to see where the system is breaking down and how can the policy action be taken, I think it's really important that we have those granular insights. Otherwise, we'll just be talking at a very macro problematic level, and absolutely essential to get policy planners, urban designers in the room to look at, because they are the ones who will design the solutions, right? And just to come back to the point of technology, so yes, we can't escape it. It is an enabler, but technology is not vis-a-vis just the apps that are created in the user's smartphone. Technology is also in terms of the systems that can be created, right? The aggregation that can come in, the kind of data that it generates and how we use it. So I think it's important to look at it from its entirety, right? How does it help also make our planning work that much easier? If we have that kind of data as to, okay, like I said, how women are traveling, or where are disabled people centered, or who needs it more, where is the gap? So you're able to address those.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Actually, I have one question, and I think I will direct it to the city official here. Yeah, so the question says that, how safe and inclusive are our cities and the transportation infrastructure for women and children and people with disabilities, especially in the context of disasters, and as their absence compromises safety and security. Are we using GIS-based systems to tackle these challenges? So maybe I can actually bring in Akanksha Juneja, if she's still online. Ms. Akanksha?
I'm sorry, Akanksha was not feeling well. So
Oh,
she,
okay. So do you think from your end, there could be someone who could help us with this answer? That how does it go beyond just, also looking at, context in the context of disaster?
see, in terms of disaster, I will not be the right person. As a person, I can tell you, what I perceive the disaster is.
So basically, I'll just repeat my question. It's basically about, how safe and inclusive are our cities. So again, looking at the same aspect, the same lens, but only when in the context of disaster, what happens then? Is there any, are we using any systems to kind of tackle these challenges, which are
Yes.
actually impacting the vulnerable sections?
Yes,
Also looking at gender. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a public announcement system, which we use. Anything happens, any disaster happens, we announce it on the PA system, and it transmits to the entire city. We have almost 40 locations, where we have these kind of systems, and we also have in case of anything, anybody tries to run away, we have cameras, not only cameras, but we have at the entry and exit of the city, we have police barricades and cameras also. We announce, nobody can escape from there. So this is the initiative of the Sagar Smart City. And I think, most of the smart cities are now, trying to have, CCTVs installed and, PA system announced, PA system is there so that, anything can be announced and public can react, public can, follow the instructions accordingly.
Okay, thank you. I think while this answer is satisfactory, I think we were looking at something which was more from a view of safety of children and women. So that was the part, but I think your app and other systems together could possibly be a big stance. I don't know what that is, if there's some direct intervention there, but maybe something which is also food for thought, this question. Yeah, no problem. So anyways, we have come to the end of this discussion today, and I would like to thank all the panelists who were here today. I hope all our audience is taking away a lot with them, because we've spoken on so many important topics. But I think all in all, what we really need to understand is, we need to have gender vulnerable groups, everything is center stage. We need to kind of focus on this as we work on policies, projects, and involve people in all of this. So that's the larger takeaway. And I think the personal stories which were put out here really gave us a lot to think about. So thank you to all the panelists. And now I would like to hand over to, hello.
Before you end, I would like to make one this thing. Can I?
Okay, so if it's quick, because we are completely out of time.
We talked about technology, safety, gender, all we talked about, but transport, end-to-end connectivity is more important, I think. Then somebody in the beginning, in the opening note, had said, as per 2011 census, private cars and, vehicles are growing up, and public transport is going down and down. So that's what we'll have to think. This is my view, end-to-end connectivity. If I have to take an auto, reach station, and then, again, dropping out, you have to walk to your workplace, it becomes difficult. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you for that last remark. And I would now like to hand this over to Siddharth, who will take it forward from here.
Thank you so much, Saili, for such an intriguing session. The work done by different actors in creating inclusive cities has been really insightful. What intrigued me even more is the variety of approaches that different experts from different perspectives take. Right to city is basic, yet so difficult to achieve, and people should be made aware, and the right outreach should be made around it. I'm sure all attendees have a lot to take away from today's session. I would now like to invite Ashwati Dilip, Managing Director, ITDP, to kindly give the concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Happy evening, everyone. What do I say after this webinar? I lead ITDP, as Siddharth mentioned, and we've been working with over 100 cities in India with the Smart Cities Mission and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And I've been a part of numerous webinars since technology enabled these discussions. And honestly, I've not been a part of a discussion with such diverse participation where such powerful and moving stories were shared, where these innovative solutions were discussed, and where the urgent need for integrated initiatives to create an equitable and inclusive city was highlighted. I heard so many strong messages. We're not a minority. Often we speak about serving the needs of minority, but as Nidhi so wonderfully put it, that when we put all of these minorities together, we are the majority. When I heard Ms. Meghna speak about her experience, it just sort of reinforced in my mind that each of our experiences are so unique. I still remember I was walking, so we work very closely with the government, and I was walking very close to the municipal corporation of one of the cities, and that was a footpath that I often sort of walked on. But on that day, I was pregnant and I was on my 8th month. And while I was getting down from the footpath to cross the street, I realized I needed somebody's help. I needed to hold my male colleague's hand in order to step down from the footpath. So, and as our speakers mentioned, that we may be able today, but as we age and as every day unfolds, we could have a disability as well. So we're so unique, and the need for us to keep that uniqueness in the center as we design our cities. So the next point was how Ms. Mamta mentioned that our cities need to be centered around human design, and how Kalpana as well as Ms. Neha, all of you all sort of, really focused on how all of this needs to come together. It is heartening to see that there are many initiatives that cities such as Sagar and Bhubaneswar are taking forward. And we at ITDP have been very grateful to partner with our stakeholders in Tamil Nadu, as well as with the World Bank, to set up a gender and policy cell in Tamil Nadu. Yet many of these initiatives are fragmented, and we have a long way to go. And I, representing ITDP India, and I'm sure NIUA, we really look forward to working with all of you, the panelists, as well as all of you who joined this discussion, to ensure that this conversation continues to be center staged and we work together to find the right solutions. We are coming to an end of our 3-part webinar series, but we look forward to staying connected with all of you to take this movement and this message forward as well. So thank you once again to all the panelists, and a very, a great feeling of gratitude for the wonderful participants we've had. We've sort of really shot out of our time slot, but our participants have stayed with us thanks to this strong conversation that Saili, you so wonderfully moderated. And finally, thanks to the entire team at NIUA and ITDP, without whom this would not have come together. So thank you so much. It was so wonderful being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Aswati.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ashwati.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.